Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 4, in which we're talking about business schools and planetary boundaries. My name is Sasha. I'm from the University of Auckland Business School here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'd just like to say a big welcome, kia ora koutou, and tēnā koe to everyone who's here listening to this session. So this session here, we're going to talk about basically about how the anthropocene is not a word that comes up very often in business conversations, and how we can, as business schools, navigate teaching this and navigate teaching about the limits of growth in order to recognise these planetary boundaries. We've got some wonderful panelists who I'd like to introduce now. We've got Alex Hope.
Hi, Sasha.
Hi, Alex Hope's a co-chair of the Working Group on Climate Change and Environment, Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor and Associate Professor of Business Ethics at Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University. We're very happy to have him join us today. We also have Ashish Aggarwal. I hope I pronounced your last name right, Ashish. Hello. Ashish is not here. Okay, no problem. All right, so Ashish might be having some technical problems, so we'll just go on to Jorge Arevalo, Professor of Strategy at William Paterson University.
Hi, Sasha. Hi, Alex. Good to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. And what we're going to do today is we've got a number of questions that are going to dive deep into these issues, looking at project tools and mechanisms that are being used in these institutions, talking a little bit about how we can redefine what traditional growth and success looks like, and in a way that maybe doesn't cause environmental disruption. So there's a tension there and a trade-off. To begin with, I think we'll start off with Jorge, who's going to take us through the bigger context and discuss the planetary boundaries. So over to you, Jorge.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Sophie is going to share the slides or very good. Excellent. Thank you. So yes, this is Jorge Arevalo. I am coming to you from New York, William Paterson University, and we are very happy to have received this invite. I think what is best is that I share with you a little bit of the overview of some of the recent research that my colleagues and I have conducted. Essentially, we made an inquiry to PRME signatories as well as champions on how they were navigating SDGs within planetary boundaries. We also asked business and government about the same type of integration. I'm going to, let's see if we go to the next slide. Oops, 2 seconds. So it's very important that I mention to you that we have an amazing team, and obviously not everyone is there to present, given the time and the differences. But the individual that is responsible to get us all of us here together in this team is Jose Alcaraz. He is coming from ESDEN Lyon Business School as well as the Munich Business School. He has actually pioneered this conversation of PBIS integration into business education as well as management education in the past 5 or 6 years. We are also very glad to have Carrie Chandler. She is an independent researcher as well as consultant, and she is based at United Arab Emirates. We have Farah Asmat and Harsh Suri both coming in from Deakin University. They have also been leading the conversation of SDGs integration among PRME networks. We have Christian Hauser, who does work on collaborating and partnerships and the outcomes for these for business schools. We are also extremely lucky to have David Kolstedt. He is at the Stockholm Resilience Center. This is where Johan Rockström first introduced the concept of the planetary boundaries. We're also very happy to be with him, as well as Rodolfo Hollander from the Barnum Management School, where he leads the conversation on SDGs integration in the Caribbean region. I'll give you a little bit of the overview, and then we can continue with the discussion. So we got together about 2 years ago, and we wanted to find out the extent of planetary boundaries integration in PRME business-led programs. But then as we started to talk amongst the colleagues, we discovered that perhaps the planetary boundaries was an early conversation for them, that perhaps we were more focused on SDGs integration. Therefore, we said, why don't we have an informal discussion with champions of PRME? We approached about 40 of them, and 36 of them responded positively that they wanted to have this discussion with us. Obviously, when you mentioned the word planetary boundaries, I think it rings the bell amongst many of the faculty around the globe. So we made the inquiry, and we wanted to touch on 4 areas. We wanted to touch on curriculum. We wanted to touch on research. We wanted to talk about consulting, as well as multi-stakeholder initiatives in cross sectors. I guess the main objective that the team has is we want to be able to describe this model of integration, if at all, to be able to translate some of these findings over, obviously, to our students and stakeholders beyond. At the bottom of the screen, you will see how informal we made the survey, the interview, and we have only began to do some of the analysis. And there were 3 questions that when we did the content analysis, it came back with a lot of commonalities. But before we get to that, I do want to share with you, and this was the request by my panel and my research team. We have a link here for the 17 SDGs in the case that people are still unsure of what they are. But more than anything, we also have 2 links to the planetary boundaries. One of them brings you to the Stockholm Resilience Center, where you will see where the 9 planetary processes are. And then there is another link that also takes you to most of the research and the recent research on it. So my friends, this is actually the planetary boundaries. And I have to give you an introduction to this so that we have more of a formal approach. So the planetary boundaries is a new concept that presents a set of 9 boundaries within which humanity can continue to develop and thrive. And so the idea is that we have more generations to come. In 2009, the former center director of the Resilience Center in Stockholm, Johan Rockström, led a group of about 28 internationally renowned scientists. And their task was to identify these 9 processes. And the idea was to begin to regulate the stability and resilience of our Earth system. Therefore, these scientists propose a quantitative methodology to the planetary boundaries, obviously for us to continue to develop and thrive. But however, crossing these boundaries increases the risk of generating large-scale and abrupt or irreversible environmental changes. This conversation of PB's processes has become the framework that has generated a lot of interest within science, policy, and practice, and now more into management education. As you can see in the graph, those parts that are in green, yellow, and orange are 5 areas within the 9 planetary boundaries that we have already transgressed. And this is really sad news. What's even more interesting is that we continue to focus in general, globally and worldwide, only on climate change, but we have 8 other planetary boundaries to mind. So this is really the conversation that we should be having. So as I said to you, and this can take the direction, perhaps Alex, Sasha, and we can decide together which of these we want to discuss, which adds more to the panel. But I'll give you a very brief description. So when we did the analysis of all of the respondents' answers to our 3 questions, we asked about the biggest lessons learned during the pandemic. We also asked about the best teaching and training practices, not only for managers, but for students. And we also asked about these ongoing challenges and reported issues of integrating SDGs within the PBs. And so there are 5 areas that really resonated in the research that we have done. One of them has to do with resistance. Another one has to do with the business models and strategies that are being used at these PRME business schools, the mindsets of the faculty, the mindsets of CEOs, the mindsets of government. the research that is being done and the lack of more contributing to local networks, and the more interest in getting more results and collaborations to work, as well as the lack of measurement and metrics that many perhaps PRME signatories lack when they don't know perhaps that other schools with more resources do have these systems and do have these capacities. And so instead of them developing them by themselves, we should allow others to have awareness of what it is that we are doing locally and how that can translate to more global efforts. So I know that I took more than 5 minutes. I'm going to stop here. And this way we can come back and we can decide which ones we can answer for either the chat or amongst us. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Jorge. Just opening it up. I've got one question just on some of the, your findings there. I'm very intrigued in the idea of leveraging the idea of, you don't have to do it yourself. Others have done it before. Can you give me a concrete example really of how that's worked positively and how you've actually enacted that?
Sure. So within the respondents, and I'm just are you able to bring my presentation back? I can find it. Very good. So I can share, for example, one area when we talked about there are many activities that are taking place, and everyone is on this bandwagon, correct, to try to address as many SDGs. However, we're kind of missing out on the PBs. And so because there are so many activities and we have only begun to integrate this since 2015, there are no real metrics in place. And so there's no time to assess these goals, given that we have only been doing this for about 7 years. And so we see a lot of programs that are heavily packed. There are also times constraints for faculty, but we believe that when we talk about SDGs within PBs, that we can capture, right, this great acceleration into the anthropocene that we have here. So quite frankly, among the 36 individuals that we interviewed, we really felt that they were not very ready to talk about how they were assessing what they were integrating. So any concrete examples at the moment, this is something that we have to further investigate.
Okay. I think that, in terms of SDGs, it's a easy heuristic sort of device framework that's you can kind of clip on and use, and planetary boundaries just maybe does require a little bit more basic science and basic science knowledge. Do you think that that's one of the reasons for, the inclination to move towards SDGs? And what are the other reasons why you've seen this tendency?
Sasha, that's actually a question that I had. I have met the team 3 years back, and at the time we were putting a special issue together for the Journal of Management Education, and we only had one article that came in that was proposing to use filmmaking and digital storytelling to teach students how to get to know the planetary boundaries right at their backyard. And to answer your question, I think students love the idea of learning about planetary boundaries, and they themselves will go out and measure the toxicity in the water. They will look at how green the environment is or less green. But you are right. I think the idea of faculty resistance is that they are afraid to touch on the world that comes from the natural sciences. And this is why we think we hit the lottery when we began to work with David Kolstad in our team. He works for the Stockholm Resilience Center. This is big for us, for our team, because this is how we are getting to know that literature. We are getting to know about these quantitative methods, and it interests us. But how to convince the other faculty, right, when we are teaching jammed programs, how to tell them that perhaps we can venture a little bit into things that might interest our students beyond the profit maximization is really key. So what I did is, from getting these resources from this team, I have already integrated PBs in my undergraduate class and also in my MBA class, but at a softer level than what's being done at other universities, because I have to see the impact of how this changes my curriculum as well.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, science communications is quite critical to all of this. I'm just opening it up to anyone else who would like to ask any questions. Anyone else in the audience? Perhaps maybe Alex, have you got a question?
I could ask some questions, unless you want me to kind of give my 5 minutes first, and then we can tie them together, because I will deal with a lot of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And then following you, we've got Ashish now as well, so he'll join us. Here we are. Hello, Ashish.
Hi, good morning. And
nice to
apologies for being late. There has been a major technical glitch. So.
No, that's okay. Totally understandable. So let's just move on through to Alex, and then we'll come back to you, Ashish.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. Thanks, Jorge. I think that was really interesting, Jorge, to give us that kind of set us off with a bit of an overview of what the planetary boundaries are and where we're coming from. And I think, as you say, this is not necessarily new concepts, are they? They're concepts that may be new to many business academics, but not to academia as such. When I'm thinking about this, I'd like to think about these issues from a kind of business school leadership position, which is where I am at the moment, and also as co-chair of the Prime Climate and Environment Working Group. So how can we support academics? How can we support curriculum change? How we can support the mechanisms that we need to be able to ensure that we are teaching the right kind of, or giving our students the right kind of basic understanding. And I think we're not, and that's one of the things that really troubles me, and that's why what I bring to this. I think many of us, many business schools, many management schools are doing really good work at the moment, integrating the SDGs, integrating responsible management education, into it, teaching about ethics, responsible management, responsible business. And I think that's great, and we should all be really proud of where we've come from to move to that. But increasingly, as I'm looking at this and speaking to students and speaking to colleagues, I don't think we're not going far enough anymore, unfortunately. We're giving a very kind of descriptive mechanistic understanding of what the SDGs are, rather than that more deep understanding about why the SDGs are something that we need to be dealing with. So we need to go further and faster. We need to become a little bit more radical and critical in our thinking, in my view, if we're going to develop business managers and leaders who are going to be able to deal with the big economic problems and environmental problems that we're dealing with at the moment. So for one of the things that's missing for me in a lot of curriculum, I've looked at a lot over the years, is the why bit of for business schools. Why are we teaching this? What are the problems we're trying to solve? Why are we interested in the SDGs in the first place? I mean, is it about teaching students to be able to deal with issues from a business point of view so they can create more profit or more value? Is it so that students can go into businesses and help them develop climate change strategies, let's say, and marketing reports that speak to that? For me, it's not. We have to be much more radical with our students and say, actually, what we're teaching you here is how to live and work within the planetary boundaries that we all have to, in order to, as Jorge said, develop and survive as a species. And I think that sometimes sounds a little bit crazy to a business student when you say, actually, what we're trying to teach you here is to go about meaningful work in a way that keeps us within the planetary boundaries. It's a big ask, I think, but that's something we need to be setting to students. And one of the problems that I see constantly, and you can see through the literature, is the kind of silent mentality that a lot of us unfortunately have or are working with within business schools and management schools, within our own disciplines. We've got economics and management and strategic management and HR, and so quite often they should never meet. We'll teach our own little stream, and we're encouraged to do so by the journals which are streamed, and by our funding sources which are streamed, by the way our teaching allocations are, which are streamed. Whereas, of course, teaching about solving issues around planetary boundaries, there are no limits, there are no boundaries. So we need to be able to draw from every single discipline. And then one of the things that Jorge is talking about is absolutely right, is in the questions that Sasha's been asking, is the problem with academics not being able to understand or teach things like planetary boundaries. And there were a couple of thoughts I have on that. So one, that's a big project that we run with the Climate and Environment Working Group. We do the carbon literacy training, which we've taken thousands of academics and students through now. It's a simple 8-hour course, which gets people to understand what climate change is, what carbon is, to understand what the big issues are they need to deal with, and to understand things like working within the planetary boundaries where it comes to climate change and carbon. 8 hours in total. We teach a bit of climate science, nothing heavy, nothing that people can't deal with. We get people to do the carbon footprint and to understand what that actually means. And it astonishes me sometimes how many people just don't have that very basic understanding of what climate change is and how to deal with it. And so we can do that, or we could upskill academics to do that. If we really want to go further, we can just reach across into our institutions. Many of us are business schools, we're part of a larger university. We can bring our colleagues who from geography departments, earth science departments in, and they can do some of that teaching for us. That's what we're doing at my university at the moment. We're working hard to try to find ways to kind of break down those boundaries across faculties and bring those people in. So for me, we just need to be able to work to encourage our students and our academics to have that deeper understanding of those mechanisms as to why we are teaching them business. What are the issues we're trying to solve here? And at the end of the day, as we all will know, those of us who work in Prime, business is a change model, isn't it? It's a way of creating change in the world. It's a way of creating value in the world. It's a way of helping people come out of poverty in some respects. We need to be teaching that those are the big issues we can face. We're not teaching people the kind of economics of commerce anymore. We're not teaching them how to create profit for companies and shareholders anymore. But we need to go back to first basics and say, the reason we're doing this is so we can all live and work within our planetary boundaries. I think I'll leave that there.
That was good. Thanks, Alex. That was a fantastic, short, quick presentation. Definitely keen on that carbon literacy. In fact, one of the questions that came up for me when you were speaking was you talked about basic understanding, and I think I'd like to know what do you mean by basic understanding. And I guess you'll talk about the carbon literacy as being one part of that. But then, of course, when we talk about sustainability, we're also talking about water and we're talking about biodiversity. So how do we teach, across all the domains, the basics, and what are the basics?
I'll give you a quick example from carbon literacy training then. So when we talk about carbon, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, we talk about the greenhouse effect, and a lot of people don't know what the greenhouse effect is. So that's a very simple thing we could do. We can show them the model, the way that the solar radiation comes in, the way it gets trapped, and the way that greenhouse gases are part of that kind of how they affect that. And so when you're talking to people, quite often they're like, oh, I didn't actually realize it was called the greenhouse effect because it is the greenhouse. And there's simple things like that. And then we talk about carbon sinks. And, we ask the audience what's a carbon sink, and many of them don't know what a carbon sink is. And we talk about, okay, well, a carbon sink quite simply is a massive forest, or actually, the oceans are a carbon sink. And then we've got the peatlands, which are carbon sink. And then how we affect those. So actually, as we kind of de-acidify the oceans, they take less carbon in. And that starts to talk about that kind of system sinking bit, that kind of rebound effect. Then we talk about how when we're clearing parts of the Amazon or clearing the peat bogs up in the tundra, and what that means for carbon. If we haven't got those carbon sinks, then that kind of reinforces. It's simple things like that we teach. We don't need to teach them kind of very complicated earth science concepts. We just need to get them to understand that there is such a thing as a carbon sink, there's such a thing as a greenhouse effect. And once they start to understand that, they start to think about, okay, so my business is creating emissions, which then goes into and they can start to make those kind of linkages in their head that the kind of things that businesses do on a day-to-day basis have an impact on the kind of amount of greenhouse gas and also detrimental of the carbon sinks and how that affects all of us. So I think that's the kind of limit I think we need to go to.
And then across the other domains of water, biodiversity, these are much trickier questions, I think. What are the basics in those fields? Anyone?
See, I would say, sorry, I would say, look, unless you've done a geography A-level, a geography GCSE, geography kind of teaching at school, and a lot of our students haven't, you may not have come across anything just as like a water cycle. You know what I mean? Since you were 13, 14 years old, perhaps. And I think sometimes getting students back in and faculty back in and reminding them that what the water cycle works and where we insert into that that's all you need to do. We don't need to go much further than that.
I think I quite like the idea of a systems approach of basic learning, because of course biodiversity impacts climate change and vice versa. And just to have, exactly what you say. Now, I realize we're running out of time, so I'm going to have to pivot to Ashish. But before I go, I think one thing that we haven't got any questions. One thing that came to my mind is the critique on sustainable development goals is that, there's a focus on growth. And so, how have both of you, and Ashish as well, how have you talked about degrowth, and do you talk about degrowth? Maybe Alex.
Yeah. Okay.
Alex, any comments on degrowth?
Yeah, so I think we need to be teaching students about every kind of economic model that that we have, if you like, and every business model that we have, and degrowth is one of them. I'm not going to suggest that degrowth is better than other models at all. I have my own thoughts on that, but as academics, I think we need to expose our students to the concepts such as degrowth, and we need to debate them deeply, and we need to get them to think about what that means. We're always saying that we need to make students think more critically, and I don't think there's anything more critical in business than the debate on degrowth. How do you create value plus reduce the amount, in a degrowth economy? I think that's one of the things that I think we need to be talking about. And I think we have to remember that we may teach business students in our business management schools. They won't always go off and work in business. They'll go off and start community interest companies. They go off and work in the social sector, the third sector. They go off and work in local government. They'll go off and work in other kind of entities other than traditional for-profit business entities. But if we're not arming them with the kind of understanding that actually there are other models of doing business away from traditional growth, then we're failing them. So we need to be exposing them to every single kind of economic concept and allow them to kind of debate them.
That's great. That's a good answer. Thank you. And just switch to Ashish. You've got 2 minutes now from 5 to 2 because you were late. So that's a penalty.
Apologies for that. But technologies have a very strange way to intervene at very right times. But anyways, I won't lose much time on that. So I will have to be very brief. So 2 things. Of course, Jorge and Alex, I heard them. I do have a slightly different take on the idea of planetary boundaries, and which is aligned to the context where I come from. So, for example, the questions which we often, and mind you, I'm talking, so we do have a specialized MBA program on sustainable management, and where we talk a lot about sustainability. And we also have a usual MBA program where we teach all the management courses and all. So, but the kind of conversations we have once we talk about the issues on climate change, biodiversity, planetary boundaries, questions of degrowth, the ideas immediately, and when we start sort of digging a little deep, start going beyond the surface, immediately the questions are oriented more towards the social issues. So, for example, the question would always, in a discussion on climate change, they will say, "Oh, so what about what the developed countries have been doing for so long?" So there is, of course, a lot of pressure on us. There is a shared carbon space and carbon budget, but is it fair to not account for that, the historical emissions? Is it how the poorest of poor who don't even have light in their house, are we supposed to put constraints on the carbon emissions onto them? So similarly, so this is just one example. Similarly on water consumption, similarly on all these ideas, wonderful ideas on the environment, resource consumption. Finally, the context which we come from or our students come from, they like to take it towards and try to link it very, very substantively towards the social aspects and the social lives, because that's the social lived reality. That's the point number one. And then, of course, similarly on the ideas, so these days we're discussing on the models of, as you said, degrowth, circular economy. So circular economy, so students again in a developing country context, circular economy, that's the lived reality. We are frugal with resources, or the students, they say, oh, these many of these things, using these steam showers, not wasting resources. This is we do quite. I mean, this is how we operate. So the point larger point which I want to make here is, so for us, the largely the there is of course the environmental concerns. There are environmental issues, of course, but there is a lot of social dimension, equity, poverty dimension related to that, which weighs into the conversations, and which really have some very interesting conversations and points come through. Coming to the and very Sasha raised this question of degrowth. I've been having this conversation on degrowth with my students, and I've had some very wonderful sort of feedback onto it. So most of the time, students say it's a socialist idea. How in the business context, being more equitable, distribution of resources more equitable, not looking into year by year or quarter by quarter growth, Q1 to Q2 to Q3. So that's how not that is how the corporates operates, or that is how the companies or businesses operate. But getting into the degrowth, I mean, theoretically, it sounds that is the response which I've been. And I can argue otherwise. The examples of Patagonias of the world, but again, I got an immediate retort is Patagonias, and how many of the companies are there of that kind. So the idea of degrowth, and that is the kind of response I've been having on the question of degrowth in my classes. And,
Okay, Ashish, I've got a couple of questions for you. We're running out of time, so I just thought I'd open it up. One is so I can hear that, planetary boundaries, circular economy, some of these ideas, there's an approach there that you think these need to be modified for the context, the context of India. What sort of leadership, do you think examples or exemplars that India can actually bring out and to teach in these other, developed countries?
All right. So one of the biggest thing which I see, especially not only from India, from the developing country context, is the idea of being. We've been hearing a lot about being frugal innovations, ideas like that, being really, really doing more with less. So we have the models and the new innovations that are coming in, starting from health. So micro insurance, for example, we have examples now for very poor people, wherein 30 rupees per month you get the insurance, health insurance. You get for the waste management. So there are solutions. You can make a lot of things out of it. So doing more with resources, being frugal, because already we have huge populations and less resources. So that is one thing which I'm seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of startups coming in, especially in Indian context, and so which really can inform the debate, and maybe even can inform the developed world, how we can be more frugal, more resource efficient, and do more with less resources. That is the predominant idea which comes to mind.
Thank you. And I can see, Jorge, there's lots of nodding there, agreement. Do you want to let us know what you're thinking?
Oh, there was something really intriguing that Alex mentioned, and that was, this why question, right? Why do we, number one, sell to faculty or the administrators or to business or government? Why should we somehow teach about SDGs within planetary boundaries? And I think it's an amazing question, because the SDGs are, to many, aspirational goals, right? And yes, we want to end hunger, we want to end poverty, we want to achieve gender equality, we want more economic growth, but at the same time, we have to think about degrowth, right? And so I think the SDGs need to occur within safe operating spaces. And this is how we can show our students, number one, that if we don't act now, we're going to reach exponential fishing, let's say. We're going to reach 90% of overfishing. If we don't talk about SDGs within planetary boundaries in a safe space, we're going to continue to have a global warming effect. Our forests, our lands, we continue to reach more percentages, higher impacts. And so I think to the point that also Ashish is making is that I think everyone is becoming more aware, right? That our actions and this relationship that we have with the Anthropocene has got to be addressed. And we can address it from we can address it simultaneously from the 17 SDGs, but it's really the earth, right? The earth and is the very base that is going to allow society and economy to continue to thrive. So it's like we're sitting on the earth, and that's why we need to make that, right, the statement. If you are able to, and you're able to navigate the two links that I shared in the PowerPoint, one of them talks about the wedding cake that Johan Rockstrom talks about, where he says that food security, right, is where everything begins. And it is associated with every one of the 17 goals. So we have biosphere is the very basic level, right? I mean, we need operating spaces, and society has the most amount of SDGs. And then back to the economy, it's really being sustained by our planet, by a healthy planet. So I think that's Alex and Ashish, you gave me more motivation to convince, right, my students that this is the why, perhaps. And this is what we're doing, to address the main question of the panel. What are we doing? So at least I am one of the faculty members at my university who can begin this conversation. And we're in the West, right? So yeah, that is one of the ways that I could think I could answer that.
And Ashish, how do you, in terms of thinking about frugality, is this frugality just a stepping stone to less frugality, or do you think that what you're seeing, the innovations in your students and your thinking on this is a model that you can, plug and play elsewhere?
I think this frugality thing is a very, very, I would see it as the core of the economic model. So, I mean, it's rather than straight away moving to the degrowth model, I think it is more sort of a practical approach, being more frugal economy, more resource efficient economy. And that is how I think we are thinking about it. And that is how, I mean, even the ecosystem is moving towards ultimately in, I think, in developing contexts. So there is a fair bit of understanding that we cannot adopt, or we cannot take the same Western models of consumption and achieve the welfare. So we have to have more resource efficient and more resource friendly models. So frugality, if you like, is at the heart of this entire economic thinking. And that is why I can give you a lot of, so irrigation is a huge thing because we are a water developing countries have issues. So so there are many companies, Jan Irrigation, I can name one. So where with less of water, how can we can have better yield? So we have come out with, this company has come out with products, irrigation products and other things. With less of water, we can get better yields. So similarly in the across the sectors, similarly across say in the clothing sector, textile sector, how we can minimize waste, how we can utilize that thing into other one. So wasting less and less, which has been the cultural ethos, I guess in the in many societies, and trying to bring that at the core, at the heart of how we produce and how we consume.
I think that's a great idea, and let's try and keep that, the frugality idea. Don't let it move. Alex, over to you. We've got a question actually from the floor. I thought you were probably best to answer this. It's related to how do you actually approach and talk to scientific faculty about, bringing on board their ideas or getting them to come and to give a guest lecture, but integrating more, just generally.
Yeah, so I guess the approach we take is more the guest lecture approach at the moment, which is a kind of first step, if you like, isn't it? So I'm lucky enough to have a background in environmental management rather than business per se, and so I can reach out to colleagues in the geography department in my university and get them to come and do a guest lecture on the science of climate change. It may just be the one, but I think it's important for students to see that you are reaching across the disciplines because that's what they'll need to do as business leaders as well. I don't think it's some people are advocates maybe getting colleagues such as that to do all of our teaching in this area, but I think that's a bad thing because then the students see that as extraneous to business. It's the guest is coming in and giving you something different. It's nothing to do with business. I think as a business academic, you've got to be there, stood shoulder to shoulder with these experts, and you're able to say, look, this person here is an expert in climate science. They're going to give you an overview of what that is. I am then going to contextualize that from a business perspective. And those of us who work in large universities where we do have that ability, I've never had anybody say no to me yet. Sometimes I've had to maybe buy them a coffee. Sometimes I've had to go and do a lecture for them in reciprocation. But I think that's the first start. And I think after that, you can start the conversation about how do we generate truly interdisciplinary degrees across our institutions. And I think that's a bigger question, but that's where we're heading, I think.
No, I think that's good, a first step, and then after that you get networks and connections and it grows from there organically. And then hopefully the institution, gets onto this. So that's great. That's wonderful. I think we've got 2 minutes left, so it's not very, very much. Is there anyone that would like to say one last word? Anything inspirational out of any of you? Come on.
I think the inspirational bit, I would say, I think we've got to follow our students. And increasingly, I'm talking to students, especially at the undergraduate level, so 18, 19, 20-year-olds in the UK. And they're saying to us, this is something they're interested in. They're interested in learning a bit more about the impact on society and environment, especially in the kind of this year, coming out of COVID and all these kind of restrictions. So we need to listen to them. And to some degree, we need to service them.
Okay, listen and service. Okay, Ashish, what are your last word? What's your last word?
My last word would be, so we need to balance and look for equitable approach between society and environment. So we also need to weigh in social issues also in this entire group. Yeah, so that's what.
And last 30 seconds, Jorge.
Well, I'm going to go with the way that Meta opened up today's forum. She talked about new pedagogies. Let's be creative. Let's talk to scientists. Let's talk to the environment. Let's talk to the backyard and just bring it to the classroom and just be inspirational. That's my take on it.
I think that's wonderful. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming today and listening and presenting. Really appreciate it. And I know I've certainly got a lot out of it. So I can't speak for the masses out there, but it's good stuff. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, take it easy. Catch you